They told him he was just another specimen. They were wrong. When High Commander Vazix ordered his dissection, Jake Mercer replied with 4 words that would unravel an empire. "We will meet again." This isn't a story about escape. It's about how one human captive turned interrogation into revolution using nothing but his mind. The Grallian. Empire saw him as just another specimen for their dissection tables, a routine, cataloging of yet another conquered species. Their intelligence had categorized humans as moderately intelligent bipeds, with limited tactical awareness and predictable stress responses. Standard procedure dictated immediate vivisection to establish physiological baselines. They expected fear, resistance, or at least some biochemical panic response when they strapped him to the examination table. What they got was utter stillness. Mercer's calm demeanor in the examination chamber created immediate uncertainty among the Grallian technicians. His breathing remained steady. His eyes tracked their movements with clinical interest rather than terror. When High Commander Vazix personally entered to inspect the new specimen, Mercer's gaze didn't waver. The commander expected biological submission signals, lowered eyes, increased respiration, the scent of fear pheromones. Instead, Mercer met his stare with what could only be described as professional assessment. His first words to Commander Vazix carried a weight that silenced the entire medical bay. "Your containment procedures have 3 critical flaws." He then listed them with precision: atmospheric recycling redundancies, guard rotation patterns, even structural weaknesses in the bulkhead design. This wasn't defiance. This was diagnostic analysis. The Empire mistook his composure for either ignorance or insanity. They completely failed to recognize they had captured a strategic analyst trained in systems vulnerability assessment. The dissection order became their first strategic error. When Vazix gave the command to begin the procedure, Mercer didn't struggle against the restraints. He simply said, "We will meet again." Not as a threat, but as a statement of operational certainty. The words hung in the air with unsettling precision. The medical team paused. Vazix dismissed it as desperation talking, but the timing was too perfect, the delivery too measured. That moment marked the first crack in Imperial certainty. They had encountered countless species across hundreds of systems, each broken by either force or psychological manipulation. None had responded with what amounted to a tactical assessment of their captor's weaknesses. The dissection was postponed, not out of mercy but sudden operational uncertainty. They moved him to maximum confinement instead, needing to study this anomaly further. What began as routine specimen processing had abruptly become something else entirely. The Empire's unraveling started not with weapons or fleets, but with 4 calmly spoken words from a man who should have been screaming. They thought they held an apex predator in captivity. They were wrong. They had captured something far more dangerous, a systems thinker who saw their entire empire as a series of solvable problems. The Grallian interrogation chamber was a masterpiece of psychological engineering. They had perfected the art of breaking any biological entity through systematic deprivation and controlled pain application. For months, Jake Mercer endured gravity fields that crushed him to the floor, then flung him against the ceiling. He withstood sensory isolation that left most species hallucinating within 72 hours. The system was designed to systematically dismantle psychological integrity through physical and mental erosion. Mercer responded to the gravity manipulation by performing burpees in his 10x10 cell. When the gravity crushed him to the floor, he treated it as resistance training. When it flung him upward, he practiced controlled landings. The guards watched through observation ports, bewildered by this human who treated torture like athletic conditioning. During one particularly brutal gravity cycle, he began singing an old Earth song about a tiger's eye. The off-key melody echoed through the containment wing, audible even through soundproofing. His routine became a calculated psychological counterattack. Each push-up was a statement. Each jumping jack was a challenge. The guards grew visibly frustrated as their most advanced techniques failed to produce the expected results. They increased intensity, cycling through gravity profiles designed to disorient and disable. Mercer adapted his exercises accordingly, turning their attempts to break him into an impromptu fitness program. He began anticipating guard rotation patterns within the first month. He noted the subtle changes in footstep cadence that signaled shift changes. He tracked maintenance schedules by the hum of atmospheric recyclers. His questions during interrogation sessions became more insightful than the questions being asked of him. He'd inquire about Gralian logistics chains, communication latency across star systems, and fleet deployment protocols. The interrogators found themselves answering more questions than they asked. They'd begin sessions intending to extract human military capabilities and end up explaining Imperial command structures. Mercer's queries were always framed as genuine curiosity, delivered with the same calm precision he'd shown on the dissection table. The dynamic shifted imperceptibly but irreversibly. The turning point came during a standard interrogation session. The interrogator asked about human pain thresholds. Mercer responded by asking about Gralian global strategic response times. Specifically, he wanted to know how long it would take a reserve fleet to respond to simultaneous uprisings in 3 separate systems. The question hung in the air, too precise to be random curiosity. The interrogator suddenly realized they weren't extracting information anymore. They were providing it. The captive was conducting his own intelligence-gathering operation from inside a maximum security cell. Every session, every gravity torture cycle, every guard interaction, it was all data collection for Mercer. The Empire thought they had a specimen in isolation. They actually had an observer studying their entire operational methodology. The interrogation room had become his reconnaissance post. Commander Liz Parvik represented Gralian interrogation doctrine in its purest form. Her record showed 97 successful extractions across 42 species. She approached Mercer with clinical precision, her mission clear: break the human specimen and extract actionable intelligence. Standard protocols dictated controlled stress application, sensory manipulation, and systematic erosion of psychological defenses. She began with the established playbook, expecting the human to fracture like all the others. Her first deviation from protocol was subtle. She brought him a data slate containing Earth literature, not for psychological leverage but curiosity. She wanted to understand the cultural context that produced this unbreakable subject. The sessions gradually shifted from interrogation to conversation. She found herself discussing human philosophy instead of demanding military secrets. Mercer would analyze Gralian poetry with the same intensity he'd previously shown discussing fleet deployments. Parvik started documenting human psychological traits that contradicted Imperial intelligence reports. She noted their peculiar humor, not just as stress relief but as sophisticated social bonding mechanism. She observed how Mercer built rapport through shared intellectual challenges rather than hierarchical dominance. Her reports to command began including observations about human resilience factors that might have military applications. She framed them as intelligence gathering, but the focus had clearly shifted. The laughter began during a session about human comedy traditions. Mercer explained a concept called deadpan delivery while maintaining perfect seriousness. Parvik found herself laughing, a breach of professional decorum that would have earned disciplinary action in any other circumstance. The sound startled both of them. She quickly resumed her professional demeanor, but the barrier had been breached. The interrogator had shared a moment of genuine amusement with her subject. Her subsequent reports grew increasingly questioning of Imperial assumptions. She documented how human weaknesses, empathy, humor, curiosity, might actually constitute strategic advantages in certain scenarios. She suggested that the Empire's focus on dominance-based interaction might be limiting their understanding of other species. These were dangerous thoughts for a Gralian officer to entertain. The ideological contamination was spreading through careful observation rather than forceful conversion. The turning point came during her monthly evaluation. Her superior questioned why interrogation sessions were producing more cultural analysis than military intelligence. Parvik responded with a statement that would later appear in her court-martial proceedings. "I have begun to question whether they are always the same thing." The admission hung in the evaluation chamber. She wasn't just studying human psychology anymore. She was re-evaluating Gralian doctrine through its lens. Her sessions with Mercer became increasingly collaborative. They analyzed Imperial strategic texts together, with Mercer pointing out systemic blind spots and Parvik recognizing their validity. She started suggesting modifications to interrogation protocols based on human psychological insights. The captive was no longer just providing information. He was reshaping Gralian intelligence methodology from inside his cell. The interrogator had become the student, her subject the teacher. Parvik's transformation demonstrated the most dangerous kind of ideological shift, not one forced through coercion, but arrived at through genuine intellectual engagement. She began strategically editing her reports to protect Mercer from more aggressive interrogators. She scheduled his sessions during shifts manned by less experienced personnel. The Empire's top interrogator was now running interference for her subject. The system designed to break prisoners was instead breaking its operators. Jarvik represented the Empire's most reliable yet invisible asset, the maintenance caste that kept systems running without recognition. His status placed him 47 levels below even the lowest guard in the prison hierarchy. His world consisted of conduit repairs, atmospheric regulator maintenance, and structural integrity checks. He moved through prison corridors unnoticed, a gray-clad technician performing essential but ignored functions. The Empire designed its caste system to ensure those who maintained the machines never questioned the machine itself. Jake Mercer noticed him immediately. During a gravity fluctuation incident that required emergency repairs in the cell block, Mercer watched Jarvik work. Instead of the usual prisoner intimidation or demands, Mercer asked about the redundancy systems and the environmental controls. The question surprised Jarvik. Prisoners typically either ignored him or made demands. This human wanted to discuss engineering principles. Their first conversation lasted 7 minutes before guards ordered Jarvik to move to the next maintenance checkpoint. The conversations became routine whenever Jarvik performed nearby repairs. Mercer would ask technical questions about Imperial systems, not how to escape them but how they functioned. He inquired about power distribution networks, communication relay designs, even waste reclamation systems. Jarvik found himself explaining Imperial engineering with professional pride at first. Mercer would then point out design inefficiencies or alternative approaches he'd observed in human systems. The exchanges felt like technical discussions between colleagues rather than prisoner and technician. Mercer showed how certain Imperial designs weren't inevitable, products of superior technology but specific cultural choices. He demonstrated how human engineers might have solved the same problems differently. Jarvik began seeing the Empire's infrastructure not as perfection, but as one possible configuration among many. The technical certainty that had defined his worldview started developing cracks. He found himself thinking about Mercer's suggestions during off hours, sketching alternative designs on his personal data slate. The transformation became operational when Jarvik began falsifying maintenance reports. Small things at first, listing systems as fully functional when they needed recalibration, reporting completed repairs that he'd actually postponed. He started smuggling extra nutrition packets to Mercer's cell, concealed in tool compartments. The risks were enormous. Discovery meant reclassification and likely execution. Yet he continued, each small act of rebellion feeling like correcting an engineering flaw rather than committing treason. His actions created subtle but cumulative inefficiencies throughout the prison systems. Environmental controls ran slightly out of specification. Surveillance monitors developed intermittent glitches. Communication relays experienced unexplained latency. Individually, these were minor maintenance issues. Collectively, they created gaps in Imperial oversight, small windows of opportunity that someone might exploit. Jarvik became the fulcrum of a quiet revolution, his wrench as dangerous as any weapon. The technician's transformation demonstrated how ideological shifts could operate through practical channels. Jarvik wasn't converted through speeches or manifestos, but through technical dialogue that challenged his professional assumptions. His rebellion wasn't dramatic, it was methodological. He applied engineering principles to the problem of oppression, treating the Empire itself as a system that could be reverse-engineered and improved. The Empire's greatest strength, its efficient infrastructure, became its vulnerability through one technician who learned to think differently about systems. Drath prison riots followed a predictable pattern. Inmates would reach breaking point due to overcrowding, malnutrition, or guard brutality. They would overwhelm a section, seize weapons, take hostages. Imperial response teams would then deploy suppression gas, sonic disruptors, and tactical squads. The official reports would later list casualties as necessary casualties of maintaining order. The system was designed to crush rebellion through overwhelming force, not negotiate with it. The Drath uprising began like all the others. A guard's excessive force during meal distribution triggered a spontaneous reaction from 3 different species simultaneously. The riot spread through 6 cell blocks within minutes. Inmates seized control of environmental controls, disabled surveillance systems, and barricaded corridors. Imperial response teams mobilized according to standard protocol, preparing for full suppression. They expected the usual cycle of violence followed by mass casualties. Jake Mercer had been preparing for this moment for 7 months. He'd mapped guard response patterns, studied riot control procedures, and identified which inmates had leadership potential. He'd quietly built relationships across species lines, learning which grievances were universal and which were specific. When the riot erupted, he didn't join the violence. He moved toward the command center the inmates had established in the mess hall. The riot leader was a hulking reptilian called Dra, who had taken 3 guards hostage. He was preparing to execute them on live feed to the administration when Mercer arrived. Dra turned to him, expecting support. "This isn't what we discussed," Mercer said calmly. The riot leaders fell silent. They had expected the human to provide tactical advice, not challenge their methods. Mercer laid out his alternative. He would negotiate with prison administration to end the violence in exchange for concrete improvements. His demands were specific and measurable: increased caloric intake, medical care standards, regulated labor hours, and independent oversight of disciplinary actions. He presented them not as requests but as operational parameters for peaceful resolution. The negotiation that followed was unprecedented in Gralian penal history. Mercer communicated directly with Warden Crix through a secured channel, while riot leaders listened. He spoke the language of administrative efficiency rather than revolution. He framed the demands as cost-saving measures that would reduce future uprisings and improve productivity. He presented data on how improved conditions actually enhanced prisoner output. The warden initially refused, citing protocol. Mercer then detailed exactly how many guards would die in the suppression operation, how much damage the riot would cause to infrastructure, and how the incident would reflect on the warden's career record. He provided specific numbers from previous riots and their consequences for the officers involved. The calculation became purely practical rather than ideological. Prisoners returned to their cells voluntarily after Mercer secured agreement in principle. They moved back in orderly groups, some even assisting injured guards. The riot ended without further violence. Imperial medics treated wounded guards alongside injured inmates. The scene was utterly foreign to standard riot resolution procedures. Mercer had transformed violent rebellion into policy negotiation. He demonstrated that the Empire's enforcement mechanisms could be redirected through strategic communication, rather than confronted through force. The Drath riot became a case study in alternative conflict resolution, one that would eventually be studied across multiple systems. The prisoners gained tangible improvements while the administration avoided casualties and property damage. Both sides achieved their core objectives without the traditional body count. Solitary confinement was supposed to break his will. The Empire placed Jake Mercer in a lightless, sound-dampened cell after the riot negotiations, believing isolation would finally erode his resistance. They miscalculated. The sterile environment became his operational headquarters. Without distractions, he could focus entirely on building what the Empire couldn't detect. Communications network spanning multiple species and security levels. His negotiated privileges from the riot resolution provided the foundation. As prisoner liaison, he gained access to administrative offices, medical bays, and even low-security workshops. He moved through these spaces with purpose, his movements timed to intercept specific personnel at precise moments. He identified sympathetic guards by their treatment of prisoners, technicians by their frustration with imperial bureaucracy, and medical staff by their adherence to ethical codes over regulations. The riot had demonstrated his methods could achieve tangible results. Prisoners now saw him as a legitimate intermediary, rather than just another inmate. Guards who had witnessed the peaceful resolution began sharing minor grievances about command decisions. Mercer listened to everyone, collecting information like pieces of a complex puzzle. He remembered names, family details, professional frustrations, building psychological profiles of every person he encountered. He established communication channels, using methods the Empire never anticipated. Maintenance request forms contained hidden messages in repair priority codes. Medical supply inventories carried data and shipment quantities. Even the prison's food distribution system became an information network, with specific meal tray arrangements signaling messages between cell blocks. The Empire monitored obvious communication methods while missing the subtle patterns developing right under their sensors. His network expanded beyond Drath's walls through smuggled data chips, concealed in supply shipments. Maintenance technicians like Jarvik became willing couriers, hiding messages in equipment calibration reports. Guards on transfer duty carried encrypted data to other facilities, often unaware of what they transported. The prison's own logistics system became Mercer's galactic communication network. He began coordinating with other imprisoned species systematically. The avian Kellians provided their expertise in frequency-hopping communications. The aquatic Marani offered their understanding of fluid dynamics for bypassing security systems. Even the silicate lifeforms contributed their unique perception of structural vibrations for detecting guard movements. Each species brought specialized knowledge to the network. Drath Prison transformed from an Imperial control facility into the cradle of a cross-species alliance. Inmates who had previously fought over resources now shared intelligence. Species that had never communicated before developed common coding systems. The very diversity the Empire used to divide prisoners became their strategic advantage. Mercer's cell became the coordination center, though he never left it. He was building a resistance army from inside 10 square meters of confinement. The Empire monitored his physical movements while missing the ideological expansion occurring throughout their facility. They saw prisoners becoming more compliant, not recognizing they were actually becoming more coordinated. The quiet conversations in corridors, the exchanged glances during meal distribution, the subtle adjustments to work assignments, all were calculated movements in a larger strategy. The network operated on trust rather than hierarchy. Mercer established cell leaders across species lines, each responsible for their group's coordination. They developed contingency plans, escape routes, and emergency signals. The prison that was designed to isolate and control had become a training ground for galactic resistance. Every interaction, every exchanged message, every small act of defiance strengthened the connections between species that the Empire had kept separated for centuries. Mercer's greatest achievement wasn't the network itself, but the shared purpose he fostered. Prisoners who had only known oppression began thinking in terms of collective liberation. The idea spread that their differences made them stronger together than they were apart. Drath became the prototype for what would eventually challenge the entire Imperial structure, not through unified conformity, but through coordinated diversity. The POW system declaration arrived without warning across all Imperial channels. An entire star system announced its independence simultaneously. Every planet, every orbital station, every outpost broadcasting the same message in perfect synchronization. Imperial Command initially dismissed it as a communications glitch. Then they lost contact with the regional governor. Then their military garrison went silent. The Empire that had never faced organized resistance suddenly confronted a perfectly coordinated secession. Imperial response followed standard protocol. They dispatched a battle group to crush the rebellion. 5 warships jumped into the POW system expecting to find disorganized insurgents. They found nothing where Imperial facilities should have been. No distress signals, no debris, just empty orbital space where command centers had operated for decades. Surveillance drones later identified a debris field where the battle group vanished. No engagement reports were ever recovered. Encrypted communications intercepted from POW revealed celebrations in 17 different languages. Kellian flight patterns coordinated with Marani sonar signals. Reptilian thermal signatures matched with silicon-based lifeform seismic readings. The coordination was too precise for any spontaneous uprising. This was the result of meticulous planning and cross-species training. The Empire monitored these communications but couldn't decipher the operational patterns. The broadcast that followed identified them as the Free Species Alliance. The message repeated across Imperial frequencies in flawless Gralian, the language of their oppressors. The voice was calm, measured, devoid of revolutionary rhetoric. It simply stated that the POW system was now under self-governance and would resist any Imperial intervention. The message ended with a list of other systems that would soon follow, a deliberate psychological tactic that spread uncertainty through Imperial command. This was the first open challenge to Gralian control in the Empire's history. Previous rebellions had been isolated, single-species uprisings easily crushed by superior force. The POW incident represented something entirely new, a coordinated multi-species movement that struck with precision timing. They didn't attack military targets first. They seized communication hubs, transportation networks, and resource depots. Their approach was methodological rather than confrontational. The movement deliberately rejected the Empire's narrative of biological superiority. Their operations demonstrated that different species could coordinate more effectively than the Empire's homogeneous command structure. Where the Empire valued uniformity, the Alliance valued specialization. Where the Empire demanded obedience, the Alliance utilized voluntary cooperation. Each action was designed to prove that diversity could be a strategic advantage rather than a weakness. Their strikes demonstrated audacious precision. They disabled Imperial surveillance satellites without destroying them. They redirected supply shipments to resistance cells. They even hacked Imperial propaganda channels to broadcast educational content about self-governance. The attacks weren't random violence, but carefully calculated demonstrations of capability. Each operation had multiple objectives: tactical, psychological, and logistical. The POW incident proved the Empire's fundamental vulnerability to non-military resistance. Their overwhelming military power became irrelevant against an enemy that refused to engage in conventional warfare. The Alliance operated like water flowing around obstacles rather than trying to break through them. They exploited bureaucratic inefficiencies, communication delays, and cultural blind spots that the Empire never realized it had. A decentralized, multilingual coalition could strike with devastating effectiveness precisely because it had no central command to destroy. Imperial intelligence searched for leaders to eliminate, but found only networks that reconfigured around losses. The Alliance operated like a neural network. Damaging one connection only strengthened others. Their diversity made them adaptable where the Empire was rigid. The incident forced Imperial strategists to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their entire military doctrine was designed to fight mirror images of themselves: hierarchical, centralized, predictable opponents. The Alliance was none of these things. They were learning to fight an enemy that resembled an ecosystem more than an army. The POW system became a constant reminder that the Empire's control was never as complete as they believed. Commander Liz Parvik faced her career's defining moment. She held classified intelligence detailing Imperial structural vulnerabilities, communication latency between sectors, supply chain choke points, even psychological profiles of key commanders. Her Grailian training demanded she report these weaknesses to high command for immediate remediation, but her months studying human psychology had reshaped her understanding of strength and weakness entirely. Her detailed reports on Mercer's interrogation sessions contained more than observations. They documented how human resilience operated through adaptability rather than rigidity. She had recorded how humor built trust where threats created resistance, how curiosity uncovered solutions where assumptions created blind spots. Her analysis showed that what the Empire classified as weaknesses might actually be strategic advantages in certain contexts. The conflict became operational when she received orders to develop countermeasures against the growing resistance movement. Her superiors wanted psychological warfare tactics to break the emerging alliance. She possessed the perfect intelligence to cripple the rebellion. She understood their methods, their communication patterns, their psychological drivers. But she also understood something her commanders didn't. The resistance wasn't the Empire's true enemy. The Empire's own inflexibility was. She made her choice during a strategy session about the POW incident. Instead of proposing suppression tactics, she suggested engagement protocols. She framed Imperial weaknesses as opportunities for reform, rather than vulnerabilities to be concealed. She proposed diplomatic outreach to the resistance, presenting it as strategic innovation rather than concession. Her colleagues stared at her as if she'd suggested surrendering the home system. Her reports began including subtle modifications. She described resistance tactics as worthy of study rather than mere suppression. She highlighted how Imperial efficiency could learn from Alliance adaptability. She started redirecting resources toward understanding the rebellion rather than destroying it. Her strategic mind, trained to serve the Empire, now served its transformation. She reached out to former interrogation subjects who had joined the resistance. Through encrypted channels, she shared Imperial response patterns and bureaucratic loopholes. She didn't provide military secrets but strategic insights, how the Empire thought, how it processed information, where its decision-making bottlenecks existed. She became a conduit for understanding rather than intelligence. When the Alliance made contact through back channels, she became their advisor on Imperial psychology. She explained how to frame demands in language the command structure would understand, how to present cooperation as efficiency rather than surrender, how to trigger bureaucratic processes that favored negotiation over confrontation. Her knowledge of the enemy made her their most valuable asset. Her conversion demonstrated ideological contamination's operational power. She hadn't been bribed or threatened. She had simply encountered a more effective way of thinking and couldn't unsee it. The Empire's best interrogator became the rebellion's strategic advisor, because she recognized better solutions when she saw them. During the final confrontation, she stood beside Alliance commanders explaining Imperial response patterns. She predicted mobilization times, command decision trees, even individual officers' likely reactions. Her intelligence allowed the Alliance to anticipate and counter every Imperial move. The Empire fought its own battle doctrine reflected back at them through someone who understood it better than they did. Liz Parvik's defection wasn't treason in her mind. It was professional development. She had simply transferred her skills to an organization that valued strategic innovation over doctrinal purity. The interrogator had become a key leader against her own empire because she refused to choose loyalty over effectiveness. The Free Species Alliance operated with a precision that baffled Imperial observers. Their actions appeared as random incidents across dozens of systems. A supply ship diverted here, a communication relay disabled there, a minor official resigning elsewhere. Imperial analysts filed these as isolated events, failing to recognize the pattern unfolding across their territories. Each seemingly minor disruption was actually a calculated move in an expanding campaign designed to stretch Imperial resources to breaking point. They leveraged every Imperial misstep with methodical efficiency. When the Empire tightened security in one sector, the Alliance targeted 3 others. When they increased surveillance, the Alliance exploited the resulting bureaucratic delays. Their communication protocols emphasized strategic methodology over brute force. They shared operational templates rather than battle plans. Their encrypted network circulated techniques for nonviolent resistance, infrastructure sabotage, and psychological operations. The Alliance systematically avoided military engagements. They targeted shipyards instead of warships, supply depots instead of garrisons, communication hubs instead of command centers. A disabled freighter caused more long-term damage than a destroyed cruiser. A hacked logistics network undermined entire fleets without firing a single shot. Their multilingual coordination allowed them to strike multiple targets simultaneously across language, barriers that would have stalled Imperial responses. They created planetary-scale awareness of Imperial vulnerability through precisely timed demonstrations. When they disabled a planetary defense grid for exactly 17 minutes, every citizen saw their security was conditional. When they redirected Imperial propaganda broadcasts to show cooperative species working together, they demonstrated alternatives to Imperial domination. Their operations were as much psychological as tactical, designed to erode the myth of Imperial invincibility. The Alliance proved collaboration among diverse species could achieve what military might alone could not. Avian scouts provided reconnaissance that aquatic cryptographers used to plan operations. Silicon-based life forms monitored seismic activity to predict Imperial movements, while reptilian engineers designed non-lethal sabotage techniques. Each species contributed unique capabilities that created a whole greater than the sum of its parts. Their campaign evolved in scope and effectiveness with each success. Early operations focused on small-scale disruptions to test Imperial responses. Later actions coordinated system-wide demonstrations of alternative governance. They learned which Imperial officials could be persuaded rather than confronted, which systems were most vulnerable to psychological operations, which technologies could be repurposed for communication rather than destruction. The Empire's centralized command structure became its greatest weakness against this decentralized resistance. Imperial commanders waited for orders while Alliance cells operated autonomously based on shared principles. Standard Imperial tactical manuals contained no procedures for fighting an enemy that refused conventional engagement. Their overwhelming firepower became irrelevant against opponents who targeted their logistics rather than their fleets. The Alliance's strategy demonstrated that effective resistance required understanding systems rather than merely opposing them. They didn't try to match Imperial strength. They identified Imperial dependencies and undermined them. Their greatest weapon wasn't technology or numbers, but their ability to coordinate across species lines in ways the Empire couldn't anticipate or comprehend. The Alliance flagship Remembrance appeared precisely where Imperial defense predictions said it couldn't. It materialized at the tactical heart of the Drath defense grid, its arrival calculated to maximum psychological effect. This moment represented 7 years of preparation, from prison cell coordination to system-wide rebellion. The ship's design itself was a statement, incorporating elements from 37 different species technologies, a visible manifestation of their coalition. Jake Mercer opened a channel to High Commander Vazek directly. The communication displayed on every Imperial screen simultaneously, bypassing security protocols. Mercer rejected the terrorist label the Empire had assigned them. "We are the Free Species Alliance," he stated, his voice calm amid the gathering storm. "Liberation requires different methods than oppression." The distinction was crucial. Not criminals breaking laws, but citizens reclaiming rights. His warning left no room for negotiation. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification." The words hung in vacuum as Alliance ships emerged across the system. They moved with coordination that defied Imperial tactical understanding. Vessels from species that had never communicated before executed maneuvers with perfect synchronization. Their formation resembled less a battle fleet and more a mathematical equation solving itself in 3 dimensions. The assault targeted Imperial command structures with surgical precision. They disabled communication relays rather than destroying them. They redirected power grids instead of overloading them. Their objective wasn't annihilation but incapacitation. Imperial commanders found themselves isolated, their networks compromised, their ability to coordinate systematically dismantled. The mighty Gralian war machine became a collection of disconnected components. Thousands of species coordinated attacks across multiple systems simultaneously. Avian ships provided reconnaissance while aquatic vessels monitored subspace communications. Silicon-based life forms calculated firing solutions as reptilian engineers managed power distribution. Each species contributed unique capabilities that created a whole greater than Imperial military doctrine could counter. Their diversity became their ultimate weapon against the Empire's homogeneity. They preserved life and infrastructure with meticulous care. Medical ships stood ready to treat casualties on both sides. Engineering teams prepared to repair rather than destroy. The Alliance demonstrated that liberation didn't require devastation. Their approach showed the Empire's subjects that change could come without total destruction. This restraint was as strategic as any weapon, proving their governance would be fundamentally different. Jake Mercer's declaration echoed across the battle zone. "The Gralian Empire ends today." The statement combined diplomatic finality with strategic certainty. It wasn't a prediction but an operational fact. Hybrid vessels moved to secure key positions, while communication teams explained the transition to civilian populations. The battle became less about conquest and more about controlled transition. The engagement demonstrated unprecedented cross-cultural leverage. Alliance negotiators contacted Imperial officers in their native languages, offering honorable surrender terms. Technicians provided evidence of corruption within high command. They turned the Empire's own personnel against their leadership by appealing to shared values rather than threatening destruction. The psychological campaign proved more effective than any frontal assault. The battle's resolution established new paradigms for conflict. Mercy became a tactical advantage. Compassion served strategic objectives. The Alliance proved that understanding your opponent's psychology could achieve what brute force never could. They didn't defeat the Empire by matching its strength, but by demonstrating its weakness. The remembrance hung in space not as a conqueror, but as an arbiter of necessary change. Jake Mercer stood where High Commander Vazek had once ordered his dissection. The location was deliberate. The former prisoner now addressed representatives from hundreds of liberated systems. The Empire had fallen, but the vacuum it left threatened chaos. Former subjects across the galaxy demanded retribution against their oppressors. The air crackled with centuries of pent-up anger. Many expected Mercer to authorize widespread justice against former Imperial personnel. He offered a different solution. Cooperation isn't weakness, he stated, his voice carrying across the assembly. It's strategic advantage. He presented a governance model where each species would contribute according to their unique strengths. The avian Kellians would manage communication networks. The aquatic Marani would oversee environmental systems. Even former Imperial administrators would handle bureaucratic operations. Their abilities would serve collective benefit rather than Imperial expansion. Liz Parvik stood beside him, the former interrogator now coordinating the Gralian transition team. Her presence demonstrated practical integration of former foes. She represented the Empire's administrative experience redirected toward collective benefit. Mercer had recognized that Gralian organizational skills were assets, not liabilities. Their strategic thinking could build rather than destroy when properly channeled. The speech emphasized that diversity itself was strength. Different problem-solving approaches became strategic assets rather than obstacles to uniformity. Mercer explained how varied perspectives would identify solutions that homogeneous groups might miss. Each species' unique perception of the universe became valuable. The Alliance would leverage these differences systematically. He outlined specific structural changes. Decision-making would be decentralized with cross-species councils. Resource allocation would prioritize mutual benefit over individual accumulation. Conflict resolution would emphasize mediation over force. The framework respected autonomy while promoting collective security. It was designed to prevent any single species from dominating others. The address acknowledged the desire for vengeance while presenting cooperation as more effective long-term strategy. Mercer pointed out that cycles of retaliation had characterized Imperial rule. Breaking that pattern required conscious choice. Justice would be administered through fair trials rather than summary executions. The system would demonstrate that principles could prevail over passion. Practical examples demonstrated immediate application. Alliance medical teams were already treating wounded Imperial soldiers alongside their own. Technicians repaired infrastructure damaged during the transition. Communication networks continued operating with improved efficiency. Essential services functioned without interruption. The new order was proving its viability through action. The speech established that true power came from voluntary collaboration rather than forced compliance. Mercer highlighted how the Alliance had succeeded through coordination rather than conquest. Their victory demonstrated that understanding opponents could achieve what overwhelming force could not. The principles that defeated the Empire would now govern the galaxy. Cooperation replaced conquest as the governing principle. The Assembly recognized this wasn't merely political restructuring, but philosophical transformation. Former Imperial subjects began considering how their specialized knowledge could serve the new order. Even skeptical representatives saw the practical advantages of shared governance. The blueprint allowed for gradual implementation across diverse systems. Local customs would be respected while aligning with Alliance principles. Transition teams would assist each species in adapting to the new structure. The framework was designed to accommodate variation rather than enforce conformity. Mercer's speech crystallized a new political reality built on lessons learned through resistance. The prisoner who had studied his captors now taught galactic civilization how to govern itself differently. His words established that strength came from inclusion rather than exclusion, from collaboration rather than domination. Kovach's loyalists prepared their final stand in the Central Command Fortress, weapons calibrated for maximum destruction. They expected the Alliance to finish them with overwhelming force, completing the cycle of violence that defined Imperial logic. Victory was complete across the galaxy but remained fragile. One misstep could reignite the conflict. Former Imperial leaders awaited execution or imprisonment, their expectations shaped by centuries of Gralian doctrine where defeat meant annihilation. Jake Mercer approached the fortress alone, refusing to deploy Alliance forces. He insisted on humane justice rather than vengeance. His counter-move preserved countless lives while upholding due process. He demonstrated that justice could be administered without mass casualties. The concept was foreign to Imperial thinking, where justice meant crushing opposition completely. The scene unfolded on the command center surveillance feeds. Mercer faced General Kovach directly, the man who had ordered multiple planetary suppressions. Alliance forces surrounded the complex but held their positions. Mercer's words carried across the internal comms. You will stand trial for your actions, General. The statement signaled profound change in galactic governance. Trials with evidence and testimony replaced summary executions. This principled pivot rejected the Empire's tradition of responding to defeat with death. It established that the new order would operate differently. The Alliance medical teams treated wounded Imperial soldiers alongside their own personnel. Essential services continued uninterrupted across former Imperial territories. Broadcasts in proper Gralian reassured citizens during the transition. The surrender ceremony occurred in the Grand Assembly Hall, symbolic inversion of Imperial power structures. Former Imperial officials stood beside Alliance representatives as equals. The ceremony cemented the transition from coercive Empire to Galactic Alliance. It demonstrated that former foes could join under a new system without retaliation. Mercer offered amnesty to the vast majority of Gralians who had served the Empire. He emphasized their quarrel was with the system, not the people. This approach prevented cycles of revenge and fostered cooperation. The Gralian Cooperative formed as a member of the Galactic Alliance. Its administrative experience redirected toward collective benefit. The decision reflected a commitment to restorative justice over retribution. It prioritized healing and reconciliation rather than punishment. The Alliance recognized that the Empire's flaws were systemic rather than inherent to its people. This understanding allowed for genuine transformation rather than mere regime change. Kovac and his inner circle would face fair trials with legal representation. Evidence would be presented, testimony heard, judgments rendered according to established principles. The process itself became a demonstration of the new order's values. Due process replaced arbitrary execution as the response to wrongdoing. The moral choice established foundational principles for galactic governance. It proved that different species could coexist as equals through shared systems rather than domination. The Alliance's approach showed that strength could emerge from inclusion rather than exclusion. Former Imperial territories began integrating into the cooperative framework. This transition method demonstrated that change could occur without chaos or violence. The careful, almost gentle process of integration built trust across species lines. It showed that a more humane society was operationally viable. The galactic community watched as the Alliance implemented its principles through action, rather than rhetoric. The surrender became a template for future conflict resolution. It proved that even bitter enemies could transition to cooperative relationships. The ceremony's dignity and precision conveyed respect for all participants. It marked not an ending but a new beginning for galactic civilization. Mercer's insistence on due process established lasting precedent. It showed that principles could guide decisions even in moments of total victory. This restraint became the Alliance's defining characteristic. Power exercised with responsibility, rather than abandon. The moral choice ensured the revolution's legacy would endure. 37 species now operated under the Galactic Alliance framework, each with distinct biological needs, cultural practices, and technological traditions. The new system had to harness these diverse strengths without imposing uniformity. Old prejudices and species rivalries persisted beneath the surface. Former Imperial loyalists eyed avian Kellians with suspicion. Aquatic Marani struggled to trust land-based species. Even among liberated peoples, centuries of enforced separation created social friction that threatened operational cohesion. The alliance structure respected autonomy while promoting mutual prosperity. Each species governed its own systems according to local customs, while participating in collective defense and resource sharing. Different problem-solving approaches became strategic assets rather than obstacles. The Kellians' flock-based decision-making provided rapid consensus on communications issues. The Marani's fluid organizational models optimized resource distribution. Even former Imperial command structures found application in large-scale coordination. Cross-species connectedness proved to be the ultimate strength. Teams composed of multiple species consistently outperformed homogeneous units. A Kellian Marani engineering team designed atmospheric processors that exceeded previous efficiency by 40%. A mixed medical team developed cross-species antivirals using combined biological insights. The historian narrator documented these successes, concluding that diversity itself constituted strategic advantage. Each species' unique perception of the universe became valuable rather than problematic. Silicon-based life forms detected structural stresses that organic engineers missed. Avian navigators calculated trajectories using star patterns others couldn't perceive. The Alliance systematically identified these specialized capabilities and integrated them into operational planning. Differences became resources rather than weaknesses in the new order. The galaxy moved from domination to collaboration through practical demonstration. Joint construction projects showed how combined species could achieve what none could alone. Cultural exchange programs reduced suspicions through shared experiences. The transition wasn't without conflict, but the framework provided mechanisms for resolution that didn't exist under Imperial rule. Mediation replaced suppression as the response to disagreement. Economic systems were redesigned to reward cooperation over competition. Resource allocation prioritized mutual benefit, rather than individual accumulation. Trade networks connected previously isolated species, creating interdependence that reinforced alliance bonds. The system actively discouraged the hierarchical structures that had characterized Imperial rule. Military defense became collective responsibility rather than imperial imposition. Each species contributed according to its capabilities, some providing scouts, others technicians, others strategic planners. Defense protocols emphasized protection rather than aggression. The Alliance fleet existed to preserve peace rather than enforce domination. The transformation extended to education and research. Cross-species academies taught multiple perspectives on problem-solving. Scientific research teams combined different methodological approaches. Breakthroughs occurred at unprecedented rates as researchers gained access to varied ways of perceiving reality. Innovation became the Alliance's greatest product. Social structures evolved to accommodate biological differences while fostering connection. Transport systems were modified for multiple environmental needs. Communication networks incorporated varied linguistic structures. The Alliance didn't erase differences. It built systems that allowed differences to coexist productively. The historian's observation that diversity is strength became operational reality. The Alliance proved that varied perspectives created more robust solutions than any single approach. Their continued success demonstrated that collaboration could outperform conquest. The galactic community began thriving in ways the Empire had never achieved through force. Former Imperial territories experienced economic growth and cultural renaissance. Previously suppressed species contributed their unique arts and sciences. The exchange of ideas and technologies created a vibrant interstellar civilization. The Alliance framework allowed this diversity to flourish while maintaining collective security. The transition from Empire to Alliance represented more than political change. It signaled a fundamental shift in how civilizations could interact. Cooperation replaced domination as the organizing principle. The galaxy demonstrated that strength could emerge from inclusion rather than exclusion. This new order proved more resilient and adaptive than the rigid hierarchy it replaced. Earth believed the Artemis E mission ended in equipment failure, another tragic but routine loss in humanity's cautious exploration of nearby systems. Space agencies filed final reports, families received condolences, and the incident became another data point in risk assessment models. Humanity remained completely unaware that one of their own had not only survived, but fundamentally reshaped galactic civilization. The most transformative event in human history occurred without a single person on Earth knowing it had happened. Jake Mercer's home planet continued its isolated existence, arguing over border disputes and resource allocation, while he negotiated the surrender of an interstellar empire. Scientists debated whether intelligent life existed elsewhere in the universe as their former colleague built a coalition of 37 species. Military strategists planned theoretical alien invasion scenarios while Mercer demonstrated how to defeat actual Imperial forces through cooperation rather than combat. The paradox was both profound and invisible. The moral emerged not through grand declarations but through quiet, persistent acts of integrity. Mercer's revolution succeeded because he treated guards as people rather than obstacles, technicians as colleagues rather than tools, and even interrogators as potential allies rather than enemies. His approach demonstrated that transformative change arises from connection rather than conquest. He built bridges where the Empire built walls, finding common ground across species that had been taught to distrust each other. Earth's ignorance underscored the story's central irony. The planet that produced the galaxy's liberator remained oblivious to both his captivity and his triumph. Human news channels reported political scandals and entertainment gossip, while Mercer delivered the speech that established the Galactic Alliance. Earth's telescopes scanned empty space for signs of intelligent life while that life was reorganizing itself based on human principles of cooperation and justice. The resolution revealed that a single human prisoner's courage had catalyzed galaxy-wide revolution. Without any support from his homeworld, Mercer operated without backup, without extraction plans, without even the knowledge that anyone knew he was alive. His success came from patience and inclusive leadership rather than military might. He proved that understanding others could achieve what overwhelming force never could. Patient leadership proved more powerful than any weapon system. Mercer spent years building trust across species lines, learning their cultures and identifying shared values. His revolution moved at the speed of relationship building, rather than the speed of invasion fleets. The alliance grew through voluntary association rather than forced compliance, making it more resilient and adaptable than the empire it replaced. Earth continued measuring progress through technological advancement and economic growth, while the galaxy learned to measure it through cross-species cooperation and mutual understanding. Human societies struggled with internal divisions, while Mercer demonstrated how vastly different life forms could find common purpose. The contrast couldn't have been more striking or more completely missed by the people who might have learned from it. The story leaves Earth unchanged, but not unimportant. Mercer's success demonstrated that human values could resonate across cosmic distances and biological differences. His home planet's ignorance doesn't diminish his achievement, but rather emphasizes that meaningful change often occurs beyond the spotlight. Sometimes the most important revolutions happen where no one is watching, driven by individuals who choose connection over conflict, regardless of whether anyone back home ever understands what they've accomplished. Jake Mercer understood revolutions could be forgotten. Systems had memory. People did not. He invited comprehensive recording of the entire transformation as historical turning point. This wasn't about celebration. It was about preservation. Future generations needed to understand exactly how they reached this moment. The recording would ensure the lessons wouldn't fade over centuries. The old ways could return without proper documentation. Imperial thinking wasn't eliminated. It was dormant. The historian's task became strategic defense against ideological regression. The record would serve as vaccination against future tyranny. Each detail mattered. Each conversation. Each compromise. The documentation captured not just events but the reasoning behind decisions. The motif of observation defined the story's method and message. Mercer had studied his captors more than they studied him. He turned their surveillance methods against them. The historical record continued this tradition of careful observation. It documented how perception could become power when applied systematically. Recognizing personhood across species was the fundamental shift. The Empire saw specimens. The Alliance saw partners. This cognitive transition needed preservation more than any battle account. The record detailed how different life forms found common ground through shared values rather than forced conformity. It showed diversity as operational advantage rather than philosophical abstraction. Choosing cooperation over domination required constant reinforcement. The record provided that reinforcement through concrete examples. It showed how former enemies became colleagues, how different problem-solving approaches created better solutions, how varied perspectives identified risks that homogeneous groups missed. The documentation proved collaboration worked in practice, not just theory. The invitation to record emphasized the importance of understanding their journey. Not just the victories but the struggles, the moments of doubt, the failed attempts. The record included imperfect decisions and course corrections. It showed governance as ongoing process rather than finished product. This honesty made the documentation credible rather than ceremonial. The historical record would prevent return to imperial thinking by making alternatives visible. It provided detailed blueprints for cooperative governance. It showed how to build systems that valued inclusion over exclusion, how to resolve conflicts without violence, how to turn differences into strengths rather than problems. The documentation served as practical guide rather than theoretical manifesto. Mercer selected a former imperial historian for the task. The choice was deliberate, someone who understood what was lost and what was gained. The historian's perspective ensured balanced accounting. The record wouldn't be victory propaganda but honest assessment. It would acknowledge imperial efficiencies while documenting their moral costs. The recording process itself became part of the new governance model. Multiple species contributed their historical traditions. Different methods of preserving memory were incorporated. The final product reflected the Alliance's diversity in its very structure. It wasn't single narrative but multifaceted account. This documentation ensured the Revolution's principles would outlive its founders. It created institutional memory that could survive personnel changes. It established standards for future decision-making. The record became the Alliance's foundational text, referenced in councils and taught in academies. The historical task completed the transformation Mercer began in his cell. Observation became the foundation of the new galactic order. Understanding replaced force as the primary tool of governance. The record guaranteed this approach would endure beyond any individual leader or generation. It made the revolution permanent through careful preservation of its methods and motives. Jake Mercer's power came from observing systems and people with relentless precision. While the Empire believed they held him captive, he was actually conducting the most thorough intelligence operation in galactic history. His approach wasn't about gathering military secrets but understanding operational psychology. He studied guard rotations like tactical patterns, analyzed interrogation techniques as communication models, and examined prison systems as organizational structures. The Empire saw observation as their exclusive tool for dominance. Mercer proved it could be a tool for understanding. He turned their surveillance methods against them with methodical efficiency. Where they monitored for disobedience, he watched for operational patterns. When they recorded physiological responses, he analyzed psychological tells. Their own systems became his research database. He identified vulnerabilities they never recognized because they were looking for threats rather than opportunities. Their arrogance blinded them to how their methods could be repurposed. Mercer recognized possibilities where they saw only specimens. The Empire categorized life forms by threat level and utility. He saw them as potential partners with unique capabilities. His leadership emerged from this fundamental difference in perception. He built alliances based on understanding what each species could contribute, rather than what they could be forced to provide. This approach created voluntary cooperation where the Empire demanded compliance. His strategic brilliance stemmed from this deep observational practice. He didn't command through authority, but through insight. He understood the Gralian mindset better than they understood themselves. This allowed him to predict their responses and plan accordingly. His decisions were based on comprehensive analysis rather than instinct or force. The Empire relied on hierarchy and fear. Mercer used knowledge and connection. The resolution revealed that real power lay in recognizing personhood across species boundaries. The Empire's greatest weakness was their failure to see other life forms as equals. Mercer's greatest strength was his ability to find common ground across biological divides. He chose cooperation over domination not as moral luxury, but as strategic necessity. This approach proved more effective than centuries of imperial force. Observation became the foundation of the new galactic order. The Alliance established systems for continuous learning rather than fixed doctrine. They valued diverse perspectives as strategic assets. Different ways of seeing the world became tools for problem-solving rather than obstacles to uniformity. This cognitive shift transformed how governance operated across thousands of systems. Mercer demonstrated that understanding outperforms intimidation. His captivity became a masterclass in applied psychology. He showed that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology or numbers, but the ability to see things others miss. The Empire monitored surface behaviors. He studied underlying systems. This difference in observational depth determined the conflict's outcome. The legacy of observation continues through the Alliance's operations. They maintain detailed records of cross-species interactions. They study successful collaborations to improve future cooperation. The approach mirrors Mercer's methodical analysis during his captivity. What began as survival strategy became governing philosophy. The Empire believed observation was about control. Mercer proved it was about connection. His ability to see potential where others saw problems created a galactic alliance from a prison cell. The New Order values perception as strategic capability. They recognize that how you see the world determines what you can achieve within it. Observation became their competitive advantage. The Gralian prison system was designed to accomplish one objective: complete psychological disintegration. They employed sensory deprivation chambers that could drive most species to madness within 72 hours. They used gravity manipulation that alternated between crushing weight and weightless disorientation. Neural stimulators delivered calibrated pain without physical damage. Hallucinogenic gases created waking nightmares. Every method was refined through centuries of testing on countless species. Their success rate approached 100%. Jake Mercer's 10-year captivity defied all empirical data. Each session intended to erase his humanity instead, forged something entirely unexpected. The Empire watched through surveillance systems as he performed physical exercises in crushing gravity. They recorded him singing terrestrial songs during hallucinogenic episodes. His resilience became a statistical anomaly that challenged their entire understanding of psychological warfare. The surveillance footage showed behavioral patterns they couldn't categorize. In his 10x10 cell of polished black metal, with no visible seams and random gravity spikes, he maintained physical conditioning routines. When gravity tripled, he performed resistance exercises. When it vanished, he practiced controlled floating. His adaptation wasn't mere survival, it was systematic defiance. His intellectual response proved even more disruptive. During interrogations using neural stimulators and disorientation gases, he entered trance-like states of concentration. Instead of breaking under pain, he analyzed their methods. He began correcting interrogators' questions, shifting from subject to analyst. His comment about Earth's defense capabilities exemplified this reversal. If you want to know about Earth's defense capabilities, you are asking all wrong. Try what's the response time for your global strategic forces, much more specific. This unbroken spirit became contagious throughout the prison population. Mercer shared stories of human resistance and concepts of self-determination. He discussed democratic principles with species that had known only imperial rule. These conversations occurred during meal distributions, exercise periods, even during riot situations. He turned captivity into an informal education program about freedom. Other prisoners began adopting his methods. They developed their own resistance techniques based on his example. Some organized hunger strikes. Others coordinated work slowdowns. Several species began sharing their own cultural stories of resistance. The prison, designed to isolate and break individuals instead, became a network of mutual support inspired by one man's refusal to be broken. What the Empire intended as weakness became Mercer's ultimate strength. His captivity provided the perfect observation post to study imperial systems. He learned their procedures, identified their vulnerabilities, and understood their psychological limitations. The very isolation meant to destroy him gave him uninterrupted time to plan. His prison cell became the command center for galactic revolution. The genesis of the Alliance emerged from those years of captivity. Mercer's ability to connect with other species formed the foundation of cross-species cooperation. His understanding of imperial weaknesses informed their strategy. His unbroken spirit demonstrated that resistance was possible even under the most extreme conditions. The revolution began not with weapons or technology, but with one man's decision to remain human, despite everything designed to strip that humanity away. His endurance became the template for a galaxy learning to resist. The story closes where it began, though the terms have been entirely redefined. Jake Mercer returns with an alien fleet, flanked by the very species that once imprisoned him, yet his purpose is neither conquest nor vengeance. The human who by every imperial metric should have been broken now, leads a coalition that spans galaxies, his authority radiating not from force, but from earned respect. His victory speech echoes the chilling promise he made a decade earlier in the dissection chamber. But where those words once signaled a threat, they now frame an invitation. The meeting he promised Commander Vazix occurs entirely on his terms. The Imperial commander stands before him not as an executioner, but as a witness to his own system's obsolescence. The scene inverts their initial encounter, with Mercer now the one offering a path forward instead of an ultimatum. His army, composed of 37 species, serves as liberation rather than occupation. Their presence is not to subjugate, but to safeguard the transition. This return embodies the story's central paradox. The prisoner did not come back for retribution. He arrived with a blueprint for cooperative governance, his former captors included. The fleet surrounding him represents not military domination but mutual defense. Each vessel embodies a species that chose alliance over empire, collaboration over coercion. Their unified presence is the physical manifestation of a transformed galaxy. His approach to the surrendered command structure demonstrates this shift. Instead of tribunals or executions, he outlines integration protocols. Former Imperial officers are offered roles in the new order, their expertise redirected toward collective benefit rather than expansion. The choice is theirs, but the framework is clear. Participation requires accepting equality across species lines. The system they once enforced must now be dismantled by their own hands. The resolution rejects the cyclical violence that characterized imperial rule. Mercer's return could have initiated another era of suppression, just under new management. Instead, it establishes a precedent for conflict resolution through inclusion. The alliance proves that security can be achieved through shared interest rather than imposed control. Their strength lies in voluntary cooperation, not compelled obedience. This conclusion completes the narrative arc that began with 4 words in a dissection chamber. The promise of meeting again was not a threat of personal vengeance, but a forecast of systemic change. Mercer understood even then that the Empire's greatest vulnerability was its inability to perceive other life forms as equals. His return demonstrates that recognizing mutual personhood is more powerful than any weapon. The prisoner's army is one of liberation because it offers membership rather than submission. Species join by choice, their unique capabilities enhancing the whole. The fleet's diversity is its strategic advantage, each member contributing specialized knowledge. This stands in stark contrast to the imperial model of homogeneous conformity enforced through fear. Mercer's leadership reflects this transformed understanding of power. He commands through consensus rather than decree, his authority emerging from demonstrated effectiveness. The human who refused to break under torture now builds a galactic order designed to prevent such violations entirely. His return closes one era, while methodically opening another, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary act is not destroying your enemies, but inviting them to become something else entirely. Jake Mercer's journey redefines what true power means across the stars. It isn't about fleets or fear. It's the choice to see others not as subjects, but as partners. The most extraordinary force in the universe might just be the decision to build a shared future, not conquer one. Remember this: the greatest revolutions don't always start with weapons or wars. Sometimes they begin quietly, with a single question asked at the right time in a cell at the edge of the Empire.